The applause started before I understood what I was clapping for. Hands came together around the long glass table, sharp and confident, the kind of applause that meant something important had just been decided. I followed along a second late, my palms meeting softly, my smile careful and polite. That's when I noticed it. The sound didn't reach me. It passed over my head like weather meant for someone else. My boss stood at the front of the room, shoulders relaxed, voice smooth with satisfaction. "This marks the end of an era," he said, smiling as if endings were always clean, and the beginning of something bigger. Everyone nodded. Everyone except me. I had worked here since I was 22. I was young, then gentle, hopeful, grateful to be included. This company wasn't just a job. It was where I learned how to believe in people. It was where I stayed late without being asked, where I defended decisions that weren't mine, where I trusted words more than contracts. I believed loyalty was something you earned by giving it first. That belief sat quietly inside me as the presentation continued. The slides moved quickly. Growth charts, projections, numbers dressed up as promises. The word sale hovered politely on the screen, framed like an achievement. My boss spoke about legacy, about stewardship, about how this decision had been carefully considered. I waited for my name, not because I needed praise. I had learned long ago not to expect applause, but because I had been part of this deeply. Because I had helped build the very division being discussed. Because some of those numbers came from nights. I skipped family dinners and weekends. I answered emails from my childhood bedroom. Still, my name didn't come. I told myself it was fine. Meetings are rushed, details get missed. I smiled at the woman beside me, a board member who used to ask for my input weekly. She smiled back, warm but distant, like someone greeting a stranger who looks familiar. That's when I felt it for the first time. A thin, sharp awareness settling behind my ribs. Not anger, not fear, just the quiet sense of being slightly out of place in a room I helped shape. My boss lifted a folder, thick and navy blue. "The contract is ready," he said, tapping it lightly. "Legal has reviewed it. Ownership transfers upon signature." More applause. Louder this time. I looked down at my notebook. My handwriting had grown small and neat over the years, careful not to take up too much space. I realized I had stopped writing altogether. No one had spoken to me about this sale, not privately, not casually, not even as a courtesy. I had heard rumors, of course whispers by the coffee machine, pauses when I entered a room, but I had trusted that when it mattered, someone would sit me down and explain. Trust is that. It fills in gaps with kindness. The board chair leaned forward. "Before we conclude," he said gently, "there's one procedural question." The room stilled like a held breath. "Where is the final signature?" My boss hesitated. It was subtle, a fraction of a second too long. Most people missed it. "I didn't," he smiled again, smaller this time. "It's being handled." I felt something shift inside me. Not a break, not yet, but a loosening. Like a knot finally admitting it was tied too tight. I thought about my father, who taught me that honesty wasn't loud. That if someone avoided your eyes, you should pay attention. I thought about my mother, who always said silence could be kinder than words, but only if it was honest. The door at the back of the room opened softly. No one looked at first. Important rooms teach you to ignore interruptions. Then footsteps crossed the carpet, measured and unhurried. A man in a black suit entered, holding a single envelope. He didn't rush, he didn't apologize. He looked directly at me. "Are you?" he asked calmly, "the one named on the trust?" The room turned. Every face, every expectation. I felt my heart beat once, slow and steady. I didn't stand, I didn't speak. I just met his eyes and nodded. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't known before, that the applause had never been for me. That trust, once given, teaches you who deserves it. and that whatever was about to be revealed had been unfolding long before this meeting, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to enter the room. No one spoke after the man said the word trust. It hovered in the air like something fragile, something that could shatter if handled too roughly. The board members exchanged looks, quick, practiced glances that said more than words ever could. My boss cleared his throat and smiled again, though this time it didn't reach his eyes. "This is unexpected," he said lightly, unexpected. The word landed softly, but it carried weight. I watched his hands, how they tightened around the folder, how his thumb pressed against the edge as if grounding himself. I had learned over the years to watch hands more than faces. Faces are trained, hands tell the truth. The man in the black suit didn't respond. He simply placed the envelope on the table, closer to me than anyone else, and stepped back. I didn't reach for it, not yet. My boss turned to the board. "Perhaps we should pause," he suggested. "This can be handled offline." Offline, another gentle word, another attempt to move something important into the shadows. The board chair looked at me, not with warmth this time, but with curiosity. "Were you aware of this?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. Honesty had always been my instinct, sometimes to my own disadvantage. But something inside me, quiet, newly awake, told me to be precise. I was aware. I said slowly that decisions were being made, not a lie. Not the whole truth either. What I didn't say was how those decisions had been wrapped in silence, how meetings I used to attend were suddenly rescheduled, how emails stopped copying me, how conversations ended when I entered a room, then resumed in softer tones once I left. I had told myself it was temporary, that leadership shifts came with growing pains, that loyalty meant patience. Now I saw what patience had cost me. The board chair nodded. "But you weren't informed." "No," I said. "I wasn't." My boss laughed softly. The sound meant to smooth things over. "Let's not dramatize this," he said. "She's young. She doesn't need to carry the burden of these negotiations." Young. I was 28. I had overseen teams twice my age. I had made decisions that kept this company afloat during difficult quarters. But suddenly, my youth was useful not as potential, but as an excuse. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like grief, for the version of myself that had believed being agreeable would protect her. The board member beside me leaned in. "Why is her name on the trust?" she asked the man in black. He glanced at me, waiting. "Permission, maybe, or respect." I nodded once. "My grandmother." I began, my voice steady despite the noise in my ears, was one of the original investors, quietly. She didn't like meetings. She believed in watching. A few heads lifted at that. She believed this company should be run by people who remembered where it came from. I continued. Before she passed, she placed her shares in a trust with conditions. My boss shifted in his chair. "No sale," I said gently, without my consent. The room felt smaller suddenly, walls closer, air heavier. "You never mentioned this," my boss said, his tone sharper now. "You never asked," I replied. The words surprised even me. Not because they were cruel, but because they were calm. I realized then that calmness could be powerful, that it didn't beg. It didn't explain itself. I thought back to all the moments I had dismissed the unease, the slight exclusions, the way praise had thinned over time. How I had worked harder instead of asking why. How I had chosen silence because it felt safer than confrontation. They had mistaken that silence for consent. The board chair sighed. "Why keep this secret?" I looked down at my hands. They were steady because I wanted to believe. I said quietly that I was trusted without needing leverage. No one responded to that. The truth, once spoken, has a way of rearranging a room. People sat differently now. Some looked embarrassed. Others thoughtful. A few avoided my eyes altogether. I felt tired, not defeated, but deeply aware. A tiredness that comes when something hidden finally steps into the light. The man in the black suit spoke again. The trust requires her presence and signature. Without it, the sale cannot proceed. My boss closed the folder. In that moment, I understood the depth of the betrayal, not just the sale, not just the secrecy, but the assumption. The belief that I would stay quiet, that I would accept what was decided for me. I didn't feel angry. I felt awake, and I knew that whatever happened next wouldn't be decided in this room, but in how I chose to move forward with clarity instead of trust freely given. After the meeting ended, no one asked me to stay. That absence said more than any invitation could have. People gathered their papers slowly, avoiding my eyes, as if looking directly at me might require an explanation they weren't ready to give. My boss left first, his phone already at his ear, his voice lowered into urgency. I watched him go, not with bitterness, but with a strange sense of distance, like watching a familiar house from across the street, after realizing you no longer live there. I stayed seated until the room emptied. The man in the black suit waited by the door. When we were alone, he spoke softly. "Your grandmother was very clear," he said. "She believed time reveals character." I nodded. That sounded like her. Outside, the afternoon light felt too bright. I walked back to my office slowly, passing framed photographs on the hallway walls, founders shaking hands, award ceremonies, smiling teams. I used to feel pride when I passed them. Now I noticed what was missing. No names, no stories, just moments frozen after decisions had already been made. My office was unchanged. My plant still leaned toward the window. My desk still held the mug my team gave me last year. "Thank you for always listening." I traced the letters with my finger and felt a quiet ache settle in my chest. Listening, I had done so much of it. Over the next few days, no one mentioned the meeting. That, too, was a lesson. Emails came in as usual requests, deadlines, polite phrasing that pretended nothing had shifted. I answered them all calmly, thoroughly. I showed up on time. I stayed professional. Silence, I learned, could be a mirror. If you held it long enough, people revealed themselves in how they filled it, or didn't. My boss didn't call me into his office. Legal did. They asked careful questions, framed as concern. Was I aware of the implications? Did I understand the pressure this placed on the board? Would I consider delegating my authority for the sake of continuity? Continuity, another gentle word. I listened, I nodded. I said I would think about it. At home, I read my grandmother's letters again. She had written them over the years, always in the same neat handwriting, always ending with the same line. Never rush a decision made in silence. I understood now why she never pushed me to assert myself loudly. She had been teaching me patience, not submission. Observation, not avoidance. The realization came gradually, not as a shock but as a settling. I began to see patterns I had once excused. How credit shifted away from me once my ideas succeeded. How my role was praised in private but minimized in public. How trust, in their eyes, meant access without accountability. They had trusted my loyalty, not my authority. One afternoon, a junior colleague stopped by my desk. She hesitated, then said, "I'm glad you were in that room." I looked at her, surprised. "Why?" I asked. "Because," she said quietly, "it showed me that being calm doesn't mean being powerless." After she left, I closed my office door and let myself breathe. That was the moment I knew the story wasn't just about me. The board eventually requested a follow-up meeting. Smaller this time, quieter, no applause, just questions. I answered them honestly, not defensively. I spoke about alignment, about values, about what it meant to protect something without owning it entirely. I didn't accuse, I didn't expose. I simply described what I had seen. Silence followed each answer. And in that silence, I watched understanding spread, not because I demanded it, but because it had nowhere left to hide. My boss avoided me entirely. That hurt more than confrontation would have, but pain, I was learning, didn't always ask to be fixed. Sometimes it asked to be understood, then released. I started preparing, not for a fight, but for a choice. I updated my resume quietly. I met with a mentor. I imagined a future where my worth didn't depend on being overlooked to keep the peace. The trust my grandmother left me wasn't just legal, it was emotional. It was the permission to step back, to stop explaining, to let actions speak where words had failed. And as the days passed, I felt something unfamiliar but steady take root inside me. Not anger, clarity. And with it, the knowledge that the outcome would come, not from forcing the door open, but from knowing when to walk through it. The final meeting was nothing like the first. There was no presentation, no applause. Just a quiet room, early morning light filtering through the windows, and a table that no longer felt intimidating. I sat with my hands folded, calm in a way I hadn't known before, not because I felt powerful, but because I felt certain. The board chair spoke first. "We've reviewed the terms of the trust," he said, "and we understand your position." I nodded, inviting him to continue. "We want to move forward in a way that respects your grandmother's intentions," he said carefully, "and your role." My boss sat 2 seats away from me. He didn't look at me once. That used to matter, the need to be seen, the hope that he would finally acknowledge what he had taken for granted. But something had shifted. I realized I didn't need recognition from someone who had confused my quiet nature for compliance. "I don't intend to block progress," I said gently, "but I won't be rushed into erasing what was built with care." The words felt steady as they left me. No sharp edges, no performance. The board discussed options, restructuring, delays, alternatives. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, it was with intention. I had learned that boundaries didn't need volume. They needed clarity. At the end of the meeting, an agreement was reached. The sale would pause. Leadership would change. Oversight would be redistributed. It wasn't dramatic. No one stormed out. No one raised their voice. And yet, everything was different. Afterward, my boss finally approached me in the hallway. He looked tired. Older than I remembered. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said. "I believed him. I trusted you." I replied, not as an accusation, but as a truth. He nodded slowly, as if hearing it for the first time. "I know." That was all. I returned to my office one last time later that week. I packed quietly, placing familiar items into a small box, the mug, the plant, a notebook filled with careful handwriting and crossed-out doubts. A few colleagues stopped by to say goodbye. Some apologized. Others simply thanked me. I accepted each gesture without resentment. People act from what they know. Growth often comes later. As I walked out of the building, I felt lighter. Not because I had one, but because I hadn't lost myself trying to belong somewhere that required my silence. The trust remained in place, just as my grandmother intended. I appointed independent oversight. I stepped away from daily operations. Not in anger, but in alignment. Weeks passed. I found myself sleeping better, speaking less, but meaning more. I took on work that respected my voice instead of testing it. I learned that peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of self-respect. One evening, I reread my grandmother's last letter. At the bottom, beneath her familiar closing, was a line I hadn't noticed before. "Some doors open when you stop pushing." I smiled. The company continued, it adapted. So did I. What I carried with me wasn't revenge or validation. It was something quieter and stronger, the understanding that dignity doesn't announce itself. It waits. It observes, and when the moment comes, it chooses itself. That was the real inheritance, and it was finally mine.